Hello and welcome to the Oklahoma High School Mock Trial Training for Timekeepers. My name is Leslie Porter and my co-host here is Joe Carson. We are both attorneys practicing in the state of Oklahoma, and we are also members of the Oklahoma High School Mock Trial Committee. We are excited to help you get ready for your role as a timekeeper in this upcoming season of mock trial. The role of timekeeper is important to the success of a mock trial team. And while all the rules, the procedures, and the time cards can seem a little complicated, we are here to help you through every step of the process. So watch this video often, read the rules, and practice, and you're going to do great. And more importantly, you're going to have a great time. So let's get started. As a timekeeper, you are responsible for familiarizing yourself with some rules. And so first of all, I'm just going to tell you what those are, and then we'll go over them a little bit. First of all, Oklahoma Rules of Competition, Roman numeral 4.G, and Roman numeral 5.D, as well as Dispute Procedure, Roman numeral 6.A. And while this video will cover many of those rules that you're responsible for, it does not alleviate your responsibility to know and read the rules. So remember, know the rules and practice makes perfect. When the trial begins, so does your role as timekeeper, so it's important that you pay attention and know your role. A trial judge won't wait for you to get up to speed, so you must practice your timekeeping skills and know the rules prior to competition. Okay, so as a timekeeper, what are some of your responsibilities? I'm going to go over a few of them. Number one, timekeepers are to act as a neutral entity. This means you have to work together to get an accurate time with the opposing team's timekeeper. It's important to know that you are not competing against an opponent's timekeeper, but instead you are working together to accurately time the trial. And since there are major penalty points for going over the time, accuracy is paramount. It's really important. So it's really important to work together with that timekeeper to get the accurate time. Timekeepers, number two, are responsible for fairly and accurately keeping and reporting the time during a trial presentation. Number three, timekeepers should display the applicable time remaining cards simultaneously. That is, at the same time as the other timekeeper. And once again, that means you're working together with the opposing team's timekeeper. Number four, at no time is a team's timekeeper permitted to signal his or her own team any increments of time remaining separately from the other timekeeper. The only time you're ever going to have an instance where you might be holding a time card up on your own is if there's possibly a time discrepancy, but don't worry about that yet. We're going to get to that a little later. Number five, a timekeeper's only communication with his or her own team in a trial is to display the time remaining cards. There's no talking with your team or cheering them on. You're just going to tell them what time remains. And six, timekeepers are responsible for notifying the presiding judge that the time has expired by showing the stop time card. And next, I think Joe's going to take it from here.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Joe Carson, and I as well am a member of the Oklahoma Mock Trial Committee. I'm here today to simply advise you as to what you're going to get in the mail and what to expect, and briefly how to use that. The things that you're going to get in the mail include the time cards. You're also going to get what is labeled as the Oklahoma High School Mock Trial Timekeeping Procedures and Responsibilities. The time card use table, Oklahoma High School Mock Trial Program timekeeping sheet, and an extra copy of that. What are these documents, you may be asking yourself, and I'll tell you, these are documents that we're providing you to be utilized by you in the competition. The timekeeping sheets, the reason you have two of them is because you will have to have two for each round. In each round you will be performing two different competitions, and each sheet will be used on one competition. The reason that you are getting the time cards is because we are now going to be in accordance with the national rules of competition, and this is what they do. You are required to bring these time cards with you to every competition. They are in intervals of 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, 40 seconds, 20 seconds, and stop. Those will be the cards that the timekeepers actually hold up during the competition. The time card use table ultimately tells you when to hold up the cards. I'm not going to go through each of these, but just to give you an example, when your stopwatch reads 5 minutes, you're going to hold up the 20-minute card. When you hold up this card, you are going to pan it around from the judge to the scoring panelist, to the audience, and to the participants. That way everyone is aware that you have 20 minutes left to finish your whatever part of the trial you're on. So ultimately, if you will study this time card use table, you will notice it sets forth exactly what to do when your stopwatch reaches that particular interval. You'll have to hold up the time cards during direct examination, cross-examination, as well as opening statement and closing arguments. The time sheets that you will be utilizing are very self-explanatory as well. Ultimately, when you get to the facility, you want to mark down what round it is. You want to identify what code the prosecution and the defense have. When you keep track of your time, you're going to write in the prosecution time and the defense time for the opening statement, and then for each direct examination for the first witness, second witness, and third witness, cross-examination of the prosecution witness, first witness, second witness, third witness, and so on. Ultimately, at the end of the trial, you will have completed this and inserted time into each blank. When you show up, you will be required to have 2 stopwatches. The reason you will have 2 stopwatches is because you want to keep track of not only your team's time, but the other team's time as well. Okay, and the reason you do that is so at the end of the trial, you can actually identify if the other team has any rule violations. And you also want to keep track of your time so you can assure that if the other team says you have rule violations, then you can hopefully prove that you don't. A good thing to do would be actually label the stopwatches with a P or a D for either prosecution or plaintiff, and defense or defendant. That way you won't have a problem keeping track of whose stopwatch is whose. When you are keeping track of your time, you can also write in the other side's time along the side if you need to do that as well. The timekeeper is required to provide a few things when they show up for the competition. One of the things that you need to bring are the 2 stopwatches. The other thing that you're required to bring are 2 pencils and a clipboard, which is not required but optional, although highly recommended. You must note that when you show up for competition, there will be no stopwatches, no pencils, no paper, and no clipboards provided for you. If you want to compete, you need to bring them with you. You may ask yourself, what do you do when you show up for the competition? Well, the first thing you want to do is actually identify where you're going to sit. And I've previously drawn out an example of a courtroom. You'll notice at the top of the screen is where the judge sits, and I know that my drawing is not really great, but ultimately it gives you the idea. You will notice that there are also counsel table. Normally the plaintiff sits closest to the jury box and the defendant sits further away. And then you have the jury box. You'll notice that there are 2 X's in the jury box, and that is where the timekeeper should sit. Now, when you get to the place where you're going to sit, what you should do is arrange your stopwatches, time cards, and time card use table. When the judge and the scoring panelists enter the room, you need to rise, and then be seated when the judge grants permission for all to be seated. At that time is when your job as timekeeper will begin. It is important to keep accurate time. Good luck.
As a timekeeper, your stopwatch will be your most important piece of equipment. So familiarize yourself with that piece of equipment. Make sure that you are familiar with it and that you can hit start, you know how to stop it, and you know how to reset it sufficiently. And remember, while you operate your stopwatch and time the competition, you must simultaneously display the time card. So it's important that you really know what you're doing so you make sure you can manage both properly. So let's go over when to start, stop, and pause the timing of the competition. You start your time at the start of the presentation of the first attorney. This does not mean the comments of the presiding judge, and this does not mean preliminary matters or issues. It does mean that you start time when the student, speaker, or attorney begins his or her presentation. This means when the attorney speaks the first word of, say, the opening statement, the closing statement, or a witness examination, you start your timing. Some examples of possible phrases to mark the start of an opening or closing, something to look for, would be, "May it please the court, Your Honor," or "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury." Examples of possible phrases to mark the start of a witness exam may be, "Please state your name for the court." But the main point is, do not start timing until the actual presentation begins. Now for some things you do not time. Do not time the administration of the oath given to a witness. Let me say it another way. Do not time a witness examination until the witness is actually seated in the witness seat, has been administered the oath, and the questioning begins. You only begin timing at the beginning of the questioning. Do not time an attorney's response to a presiding judge inquiry whether both sides are ready to proceed at the start of the trial. Also, do not time an attorney's questions to a presiding judge, maybe asking for reserval time for rebuttal or permission to move a podium, etc. Always stop time for questions from the presiding judge. Always stop time for objections, including the responses to those objections. From the time an objection is raised until the judge makes a ruling, the time should be stopped. Do not start the time again until the examining attorney resumes the questioning. You also stop the time at the end of a presentation. Therefore, when an attorney finishes the opening or closing statement, stop the time. At the conclusion of a witness examination, you stop the time. Either one of those, the ends of those examinations may be marked by phrases as well, "Thank you," or "No further questions." But if not, you stop the time when the attorney or the witness stops talking. However, you do not stop timing for the introduction of evidence. If you're worried about memorizing these rules and thinking I can't keep up with when to stop and when to start, don't. Just think it through. The goal is to time and judge the presentations of the attorneys and the witnesses of the trial, not the procedures or the presiding judges. The rules follow that logic. So consider the rules from that perspective to help you place them to memory. Next, Joe's going to talk a little bit more on timing.
According to Rule 4G, you get 5 minutes for opening, 5 minutes for closing, 25 minutes for direct examination, and 20 minutes for cross-examination. Okay. You have to understand as a timekeeper when to reset the stopwatch to 0. There are only certain circumstances that you actually reset the stopwatch to 0. When are those things? When are those times? Well, that is at the beginning of each side's opening statement, at the beginning of each side's direct examination, at the beginning of each side's cross-examination, and at the beginning of each side's closing argument. Do not reset the stopwatch to 0 at any other time. When your team or the other team is done with direct examination, do not reset your stopwatch back to 0. And the reason that you do not want to do that is because if for some reason your team does a redirect or recross, at that time, that time that your team is on that actually is counted towards the total amount of time allowed. At the end of the plaintiff or the prosecution's closing argument, do not reset your stopwatch back to 0. A lot of times there will be a rebuttal closing statement or argument, which will also have to be timed.
So far, we've covered how you need to work with the timekeeper from the opposing team, and we've covered how you and the opposing team's timekeeper must simultaneously display your time cards. But what happens when you and the timekeeper from the opposing team have a discrepancy in time? Well, if you don't know the answer to that question, you're in luck, because now it's time to cover the 15-second discrepancy review rule. So, first of all, let me tell you the rule. If, at the completion of any task during the trial, there's a time discrepancy of at least 15 seconds between your time and the timekeeper of the opposing team, timekeepers are to notify the presiding judge that a discrepancy has occurred. Now let's break that down a little bit to ensure that we really understand what that means. The 15-second discrepancy rule applies at the end or completion of any task. Okay, so it could be the end of the opening statement, the end of a witness examination, the end of each cross-examination, or the end of each closing argument. So maybe you're asking yourself, well, how will time discrepancies be discovered? Any time difference will be discovered at the end of one of those tasks because you and the opposing team's timekeeper each have to simultaneously display your cards. So you're always going to know if you have your card up and the opposing team doesn't, you guys have an issue and you need to be timing that right there to find out if you're going to make it to the 15 seconds. Because there may be many discrepancies in time, but the only time the 15-second discrepancy review rule comes into play is if the time discrepancy is 15 seconds or greater. Therefore, a time difference that's not 15 seconds will not apply. This rule will not initiate, and the 15-second discrepancy review rule won't come into effect. However, if you discover a discrepancy of 15 seconds at the end of a task, one timekeeper will politely notify the judge that there's been a time discrepancy. Once the presiding judge has been notified of the difference, the trial will stop until the judge has asked the nature of the discrepancy and made a ruling on the time difference. After the judge makes a ruling on the time difference, the timekeepers will synchronize their stopwatches to match the ruling of a judge. The ruling of a judge is final. Even if you disagree, follow the ruling. And no time disputes will be entertained after the trial concludes. Okay, so we've heard the rule, we've gone over the rule. How about we apply it? Let's imagine that we are at the conclusion of the plaintiff's direct examination of their first witness. The plaintiff's stopwatch reflects a time remaining of 2 minutes. The defense stopwatch indicates that the time is expired. Once the timekeepers discover the difference, the plaintiff timekeeper politely informs the judge that a time difference has been discovered. The presiding judge learns that there's a difference of 2 minutes. The judge considers the discrepancy and he makes a ruling. In this case, the judge rules that the time difference should be split. This ruling would give the plaintiff team 1 additional minute to complete the examination of that witness. At this point, the plaintiff and defense timekeepers must then change the time remaining on their stopwatches to match that ruling. In this case, each device is going to have 1 minute remaining for the plaintiff to complete that direct examination. Okay, so now you know the 15-second discrepancy review rule. Now Joe's going to talk to you about some disputes.
At the end of the trial, the scoring panelists will be asked to leave. If, for some reason, there are any rules violations, you will be required to keep time at that time as well. For example, each team is given 2 minutes to discuss among themselves if there are rules violations. You're required to keep track of that time and advise when that time has expired. Once the team has determined that there are rules violations, then they are given 3 minutes to prepare to argue those rules violations. You're required to keep track of that time and advise your team of the expiration of that as well. If your team decides to proceed with a rules violation, you're going to be required to perform duties at that time as well. You have to keep track of how long they argue in front of the judge. Each violation gets a maximum of 2 minutes per alleged violation. Each team only gets 4 minutes to argue all of their violations. The responding team will be given an equal amount of time to respond and to defend the rule violation allegations. If your team decides to go forward with a rule infraction, then each team is given a maximum of 4 minutes to argue those rule infractions. The team can only spend 2 minutes per rule infraction. It is imperative that you keep track of the time that your team is arguing the rule infractions. The responding team will be given an equal amount of time to respond to the rule infraction allegation.
Now I'm going to go over with you some additional responsibilities of a timekeeper at the end of a trial round. First of all, when the round is over, when the disputes are over, when you've completed the task of timekeeping, you've got to add up the time used for each side on your timesheet. You also have to sign the timesheet. Once you've signed your timesheet and you've filled out all the times, you have to turn the signed timesheet into the presiding judge. This needs to be done pretty quickly. The judge needs the timesheet so they can find out if there's any violations or if there's any penalty points for overages on time, so they can get a verdict to the trial as soon as possible. So you've got to quickly add up the time, sign that timesheet, and get it turned into the presiding judge. Now, once the judge comes back and gives a verdict in the case, or announces basically the winner, there's a time that's called the debriefing, where the judge and the scoring panelists will have a time to visit with the teams to kind of go over the case and go over their performance and give a critique. This also has to be timed. The debriefing has a maximum of 10 minutes. You are also going to be responsible for timing that. This isn't really going to score for points or to give violation points for overages. It's just to ensure that the 10-minute period is over and then they can get on to the next round. So you're going to remind at the beginning of that debriefing the judge that both timekeepers will be timing the debriefing, and you'll want to let them know that there's a maximum of 10 minutes that's allotted for that portion of the round. Once you've reached that 10-minute time in the debriefing and you've been timing that, you will signal the judge with your stop card when you want to indicate that the debriefing time has expired. Okay, so at the end of that, once the debriefing is over, when the court is adjourned, you're going to help straighten up the courtroom to get ready for the next round. So that's the end. At the end of that, you've done your timekeeping responsibilities, so have fun and good luck.
In conclusion, it is important to keep accurate time. Know the rules, be prepared, and have a good time. On behalf of the Oklahoma Mock Trial Committee, we wish you good luck and hope that you have a wonderful experience.